I started off doing New Age stuff, but I feel like because I'm Australian, I have that kind of inherent down to earth, casual sort of
Yeah.
relationship with it. So I think it wasn't as New Age hippie, but I think as I got more grounded over time, people weren't very happy with me.
Mm.
And
Really?
yeah, well, it's something that I question because I find it weird how in this kind of world there is no word for pre-list. There is no word for false spiritual experience, and even that is very triggering because like, how
Yeah.
dare you say that my experience was false? It felt so overwhelmingly real, and I've had many of those. And I'm not even saying that it's false or it's true, but the fact that there is no discernment between the
Yeah.
two. How do you
No, but
actually
we
know?
don't have to question the experience people have. It's
Yeah.
mostly the, like you said, the discernment of that experience. And so, you know, in the Orthodox tradition, I think it I think they have the really good way of dealing with this, which is basically saying you should ignore all spiritual experiences. And I know people are going to go like, "What? Just ignore spiritual
Hmm.
experiences?" But that's what they say. And the reason why they say that is because they realize that if you really believe even what a new ager will say, which is something like, the purpose of reality is to be united with the one, right? To kind of be united with the transcendent reality. Then if that's your purpose, then that's what you should be aiming towards. And then these spiritual experiences that you have, that's not it, right? Just because you see an angel or you have some feeling or you have some insight, even if the insight is true to a certain extent, that's not your goal. That's not where you're headed. So you have to be careful not to give too much attention to that, because you're going to stay there and you're going to kind of turn around in these kind of experiences. And so if you just ignore the experiences, then there's less of a danger of being, you could say, seduced by a demon, or seduced by something which is off key, because you're just kind of, and you will have the spiritual experiences, right? You will, but you don't spend your time on them, and you don't wallow in them, you could say. You rather keep your eye on the ultimate goal, which is the union with the divine.
Yeah, yeah. And even test your experience, and see if it holds up over time, if it still makes cohesive sense with the rest of your conception of
Yeah, and also
reality.
the fruits.
Yeah, the
Christ
fruits,
said,
exactly.
you'll know a tree by its fruits. That is, that if you have these spiritual experiences, but you're a total jerk to everybody around you, and it's like, and you continue to have all these sins in your life, and all these things that are your obsessions and your idiosyncrasies, then that spiritual experience is pretty meaningless.
Mm.
Like, it might have felt real, and it probably was real, but it's not moving you towards freedom. It's not moving you towards something which is more than just a kind of like an entertaining experience, you could say.
Yeah, that's why integration is so important. Like the work that you do afterwards. It's like kind of reading a book and not contemplating. You know what I mean? It kind of will just go right through your head. Except that it can be a bit more dangerous, obviously, going into these realms and let's say reading a book.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I think a lot of it has to do with like naivety, like you know what I mean, just overly trusting. I find that the
Mm.
people who are the most trusting, navigating through these spiritual realms without actually taking it seriously are like usually just kind of young white hippie Western people who've never really, I don't know, because I grew up, I've had some like kind of rough experiences, and I've met people during my teenage years like who are very charismatic, and they're
Mm.
very actually good looking and handsome and very, you know what I mean, like they know how to talk to you and make you feel good, but
Mm.
then you find out later that they're actually a snake. But you can see them go out in the rest of the world, like people being like, oh, he's such a nice person, but then when you
Mm.
actually peek behind the curtain, you're like, yeah, I know that guy, Johnny's a dick, don't trust him.
Yeah,
Kind of thing. So there's a lot of,
yeah. That
yeah.
that makes that makes a lot of sense. Um, and I think, you know, I think there's also an aspect of materialism, which is part of that, which is that because we've been so hounded, and we're hounded in school, and we're told that the world is just a bunch of phenomena that can be calculated and be measured, is that when people have an insight that there's actually something more, then it's like whatever that more is, they're all excited about it, and they just want to dive in and they want to experience. So it's like you said, it also, the materialism leads to this lack of discernment as well, because it's like, oh wow, there's this whole world that they lied to me about that actually does exist. And so it's like, open the doors open, and it's like, oh, there's something. It's like this fast, everybody's just excited about it. But it's like, no, wait a minute, no, that's a really bad thing. Like, that's a demon, and that's actually a projection of your passion, and it's like, and so, but it's, at first people don't have that capacity because they're used to be complete materialists, and so that's probably one of the problems that we have too. It's
I relate. I went through that too. And it would even, maybe even some people listen to this right now might be triggered for when people even say, oh, it's a demon. Like, oh, right, you crazy Christian fundamentalist. What do you even mean by that? I mean, if demons are just it's playing the role of God anyway, why does it matter?
Yeah. Well, people recognize, let's give it a simple example. Let's say you're addicted to something. I don't know, you drink too much, or I don't know, whatever it is, you watch porn, or like you have this addiction.
Right.
And you know that it's an addiction because because you can't control it, right? Because you try to, and then you can't, and then it kind of pulls you. And so that's a principality. That's also a principality. That is, it's a pattern in reality that is cosmic. It's cosmic because you're not the only person with that addiction, dude.
Yeah.
There are other people that also have that addiction. Means that's not an idiosyncrasy to you. It's not just relative to you. It's an actual real pattern that exists in the world, but in which you are participating. And that you are not only participating, but that by engaging in these bad habits and these bad behaviors, you are feeding it. You're sacrificing your time and your attention to this pattern, and you're making it stronger in the world because you're a branch of it. You're a body for it. You're a tool for it to appear in the world, right? So you don't need like a Ghostbusters way of thinking. Like, it doesn't have to be something like a woo-woo science fiction thing. This is just cognitive reality of how things work. So that principality has a cosmic version of it. It has to, because it doesn't just exist in you. It exists in all these other people. And so that's a demon, and you can encounter it. And you can be possessed by it, and you can be a tool for it to spread in the world. Like, have you ever met someone who has a bad habit and is obsessed with getting other people to participate in that very bad habit?
Oh,
why?
Yeah.
They even know that it's bad for them. Like, if you pry them a little, you know that it's destructive, but nonetheless, they want to get that young kid to smoke, and they secretly want to get these teenagers to drink or to do whatever it is that they do. And so they're a tool of this demon in the world. It's a real thing.
I'm just getting flashbacks because it's so true. Like, when people are so entrenched in their bad habit, let's say whatever, weed, drugs, and I've had these experiences where you're like, oh, I don't want any more. It's like, just have one, man. Just have one. Like, they're like, and they even kind of physically transform into that kind of orc demonic, like, just have one. Come on, man. Just have one. And it's like, dude, no. And then as soon as you try to break away from their lifestyle, then they get like triggered and inflamed and like, what do you mean? What, you think you're better than me? It's like, whoa, man, I just didn't want to do drugs, that's all.
Yeah, no, but you've got you've understood the right pattern. And so you can understand that. Let's say think about this. So there are principalities in the world that are trying to get your attention, right? There are some that are light and there are some that are dark. And like all the good things, like loving your neighbor, helping your friends, being good to your spouse, taking care of your children. There are all these light patterns in the world, and they are trying to kind of get your attention, and you want to give your attention to them. And then you have all these darker ones that are there as well. Now you can understand these patterns as just abstract patterns in the world, but we are conscious beings, like we are persons, and those patterns end up coagulating into something like persons as well. And so that's why in the same way that I encounter you, a pattern thing in front of me, right? You're just a pattern, but I encounter your face and your behavior as a pattern being. That is the same for these higher principalities, and so you can, like I said, you can encounter them. They can manifest themselves to you sometimes in a more immediate way, depending on people's sensibilities. But even if they don't, you can still understand that they're acting on you. And you know, and like, let's say, I don't know if you've ever, you kind of free yourself from a bad habit. Let's say you have this bad thing that you're dealing with, and you're able to free yourself from it. And then when you're kind of free from it, you're even like who was that guy who was doing that? You almost don't recognize yourself. Like, you look at yourself and you're like, who's that guy that was doing this? Like, how is it that he was doing this? And you're like, you almost like you don't even, there's something about it that you can't even you can barely recognize it. Of course, until the day that you're like in a weak spot. And then all of a sudden you don't know what's going on. And it's like, you know, you wake up and you're like back in the pattern, and you're thinking, how did I get back here? I thought I was out of this thing. Like, I thought I wasn't in there anymore. So how did I fall back into this
wake
thing?
back into Satan's den.
Exactly.
I said I'd never do this again, and you're waking up with like 10 hookers around you, drugs. So you're like, man.
And you're like, what? Like, how did I get here? Exactly. And so, like, but these experiences are real. Like, everybody's had them. And so we can understand them just in terms of psychology, but they're more than that. And you know, ancient cultures and Christian culture was able to recognize that this is not just idiosyncratic to you. These have objective reality, these patterns, and there are ways to deal with them religiously. And that something even like exorcism can actually have an effect on you in the same way that a coach. Why is it that a coach who speaks to you before a game would make you better at playing basketball? You don't think that's stupid? Well, why does it bother you that maybe someone with spiritual authority could affect you in a way that would free you at least somewhat from these different bad patterns that you have? So there are all these ways to kind of be able to look back and see again these rituals, these practices that we see in ancient culture, and just see how they're totally coherent. They're not strange the way people told us they were.
Yeah, definitely. And what I really appreciate about the Trinitarian view of God is that, well, the number 3 is actually the number of reconciliation, right? It transcends opposites, and something I've been searching for so many years, because no matter what worldview I came to, there was always this dialectical tension. There's always this or it's that. Hermeticism actually did a pretty good job of explaining like transcending duality and dark and lightness and all this kind of stuff. And even in Hermeticism, they completely prove that you can't be God because of this and this. You know, and I found that very interesting, because in this world today, either you don't believe in God or you believe you are God, which is mathematically the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's what you end up seeing. Well, it's more like, we think we're like little gods, you know, and then we kind of act that way. But usually, if you observe someone who thinks that, you realize that they're just a series of possessed, like they're just possessed by all these things, you know. And you kind of see them pop up when you're watching someone, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, here comes this thing, like here it comes, and you gotta see it coming. It's easier to see it in other people, which is horrible. It's harder
I know,
right? But it's true. You can see it. You're with someone, and all of a sudden you can kind of see something coming out, you know, of them, some like obsession or some weird way of interacting with others. Like for example, like, you know, you watch you have a woman friend, let's say, and then, you know, you're engaging, you're talking with her, and then you go to a party, and all of a sudden you see her like fall into like flirt mode, and you're like, what? All of a sudden she's like a whole other creature, and
the way
you're like,
she moves and speaks,
exactly, everything about her, and you're like, what is this? Like, what's going on? This is like, this being is not the same being that I was dealing with, you know, an hour ago.
That's why I like to just constantly remind myself I'm just human. I'm always I'm fallible. I'm always going to fall. And it's actually quite freeing to think that way, versus you are your own God, and you can basically bend reality to your will. And I'm sure you can for a little while, but I don't know, man. I feel like there's always a price for everything.
Yeah, it snaps back.
Yeah, the bill
snaps back because there's 98% of you that you're not aware of. So much of who you are, you're not aware of. Like, you know, in the Orthodox tradition, people wonder why that is, but we're constantly confessing sins that we don't realize we've done. We're constantly saying, you know, wittingly or unwittingly, like confessing the sins that I've done, on purpose or on accident, because there are aspects of my being that I'm not even aware of. And so people who think that they're kind of like these little gods, they don't realize that they have these little imps that are riding them. And so they kind of act, and all of a sudden something happens, like, this aspect of themselves that they hadn't accounted for, kind of springs forth, and and then they get sideswiped, so.
Yeah, that's why community is so important. I say this all the time, but I think it's very important to have good friends that will call you out on your BS.
Oh yeah.
Instead of just being in your own lone world, having spiritual experiences, and yes, gaining so much knowledge, just inhaling all that wisdom, and you just, yes, I'm God.
Yeah, exactly. Then you can't
and recreating that reality. Yeah, exactly. And can't do normal human to human interactions.